This episode is brought to you by the Kirtland Partnership Committee. For 30 years, they've been dedicated to supporting, growing, and preserving the Kirtland National Security Complex. They work tirelessly to enhance military readiness, foster community partnerships, improve quality of life, and promote economic development right here in New Mexico. Join their mission to ensure that Kirtland remains a cornerstone of national security and a key provider of quality jobs and investment for all of Greater Albuquerque. Together, we can make a powerful impact. Kirtland Partnership Committee, proudly shaping the future of our national security for 30 years. The New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department has reported that $6.4 million has gone uncollected in cannabis excise tax. To break down how exactly that happens, I'm joined by Albuquerque Journal reporter Matthew Narviaz, who was covering the story. And New Mexico House Republicans have laid out their four-step legislative plan for this upcoming session that covers the economy, education, public safety, and healthcare. Plus, I'm joined by Journal reporter Oliver Udebrook, who shares the latest on a woman seeking over $40 million in a medical malpractice suit after doctors left a 13-inch surgical tool in her abdomen following a tumor removal. It's Tuesday, January 14th, 2025. I'm Gino Gutierrez, and I'll have more on those stories, plus a look at the Journal's other headlines and Albuquerque's weather forecast, coming up on the Leading News. The New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department has reported that $6.4 million has gone uncollected in cannabis excise tax. To get to the bottom of how this happened, I'm now joined by Albuquerque Journal reporter Matthew Narviaz, who's been following this story. Matt, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, nice to be here.
So, Matt, tax collection discrepancies. The New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department reported that there's $6.4 million in uncollected cannabis excise tax. How does that happen?
Yeah, so I guess maybe we'll take it back a little further. So a cannabis excise tax is a 12% tax imposed typically on folks who are purchasing recreational marijuana. So, you go to the dispensary, you buy a joint, you pay a sales tax, and then you also pay on top of that a cannabis excise tax. So, sort of how we got here is, from what TRD officials are telling me is, folks who are either in delinquency or, they're on payment plans. So, sort of how I got to this story was, back in November, the state 2 years and 8 months in reached a pretty important milestone, which was reaching $1 billion in recreational cannabis sales. And so what I did is, took 12% of that and, came away with a number and, reached out to TRD officials who sort of track this cannabis excise tax to see, what number they had on their books. In doing so, I found that, yes, there was a $6.4 million difference. So, $6.4 million in under collection by state TRD. And so like I said, sort of what they had told me is, there's kind of a bunch of factors that go into it. But despite being short that amount, they still call it one of their really highly compliant tax programs.
And Matt, the uncollected taxes represent a gap of about 1% to 3%. But beyond that, they've also raised concern among industry insiders about the accuracy of reported sales data and the effectiveness of this tax collection effort.
Yeah, one person I spoke with in the industry sort of, expressed to me, how can you count cannabis sales if the tax data isn't matching up? It's kind of interesting here in New Mexico. The state's Cannabis Control Division, under the purview of the Regulation and Licensing Department, is the agency that is tracking recreational cannabis sales. Meanwhile, TRD, the Taxation and Revenue Department, is the department that's tracking cannabis excise taxes collections. So, kind of noted that in the story. But from my understanding and my conversations with state officials is that this is, not uncommon. There are other business tax programs where, the sales figures don't always line up with what has been collected.
So Matt, let's talk a little bit about licensing enforcement. The cannabis business, if you're in tax delinquency for over 12 months, you can't renew your license. And the TRD is claiming this is a measure that helps maintain high compliancy rates within the industry. Is that something you're seeing?
Yeah, so, TRD didn't give me exact numbers in terms of how many licensed cannabis businesses are in delinquency. But, like Aisha Mora, the deputy secretary, had mentioned, if you're in delinquency, in a 12-month period, you can't go back to RLD and get your license. So, they're sending notices to these businesses. They're reaching out, trying to understand why it is that they're not paying on their taxes, and trying to get them, trying to make them whole again, if you will. So that's happening. That's ongoing every day for the department, and yeah.
And Matt, one thing that really stuck out to me in your story is the discrepancies in data reporting for separate state agencies. The Cannabis Control Division and the TRD manage sales reporting and tax collection, but they seem to be leading to inconsistencies between data alignment between the two, and some critics are arguing that undermines transparency and reliability.
Yeah, and I couldn't speak for how other states track cannabis sales, if it's based on tax-generated data or not. But it is interesting, noting that RLD and CCD are tracking these cannabis sales, and TRD, on the other hand, is tracking these collected taxes, which should match up at the end of the day, right? But they're not. So, maybe here in the future we'll delve a little bit more into that. But for now, 6.4 million. That's how short they are.
And 6.4 million, Matt, is no small figure. We'll have to keep our eyes out to see what develops next here, but thank you so much for sharing the latest with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gino.
New Mexico House Republicans have laid out their legislative plans for the upcoming 2025 session, and to tell us more about it, I'm now joined by Journal Assistant Business Editor Megan Gleason. So Megan, Republicans are prioritizing the economy, education, public safety, and healthcare. How do they plan to do that?
Well, there's a lot that go into all of these different topics, starting with public safety. Crime is going to be a big issue, especially following a 5-hour-long public special session over the summer where not much really got passed. And Republicans are saying it finally feels like Democrats are prioritizing crime as an issue. With the economy, they plan to tackle things like inflation by utilizing New Mexico's abundant energy resources, including oil and gas and natural resources. On education, House Caucus Chair Rebecca Dow said parents should have more of a say in their children's education. And then finally on healthcare, House Minority Leader Gail Armstrong was talking about how New Mexico doesn't have a doctor problem, it has an insurance problem. And she brought up how Republicans want to bring back the cap on medical malpractice lawsuits.
And Megan, you just mentioned one of the biggest issues going into this session is really going to be crime, and Republicans are going to need to seek bipartisan collaboration if they look to get any of their legislation passed, but they really feel like now's the time for Democrats to come to the table and really negotiate some solutions.
Yeah. I mean, the Republicans need to have Democrats on their side to get this stuff passed. They're in the minority, so there's no other way to get it through the roundhouse. One other thing that we might see some bipartisan support on, in addition to crime measures, is holding CYFD accountable. The agency has had a lot of issues in recent years, and both Democrats and Republicans think it's about time to get an outside office in there to make sure CYFD is doing what it needs to do.
And in addition to crime, education reform is also something Republicans say they really want to focus on this session. They want to give parents more control over their children's education. They want to address ongoing issues like poor attendance, staff turnover, and insufficient education outcomes. And this all is happening despite the state significantly funding education.
It's a good question. I mean, New Mexico, it has a booming budget, but pouring money into education obviously isn't solving the issue. So it's a complicated issue to tackle. Republicans are leadership. They think that getting state out of the way so parents can make those choices about their children is the way to do it. And they also don't think spending 180 days in the classroom is the way to make education better either.
And Megan, another part of their plan is economic and tax reforms, looking at proposed initiatives including eliminating income tax, reforming gross receipts tax, reducing business regulations. How will that stuff benefit New Mexicans and the economy?
Well, the ultimate goal is to make it easier on everyone's pocketbooks, right? And it's interesting because the House Democrats have also said prioritize some tax relief when they had their own news conference. But tax reforms are a hard thing to get through the roundhouse. Both parties have tried for years to get different initiatives through. It's a tough one to land on the governor's desk.
And Megan, they also plan on addressing healthcare challenges here in New Mexico, and that's something that pretty much every citizen here can relate to. Republicans are highlighting issues like medical malpractice insurance and are even proposing capping medical malpractice lawsuits to address the state's healthcare system problems. So they're really looking to kind of solve this problem of doctors leaving the state.
Yeah, so Armstrong was talking about putting the cap back on medical malpractice and saying that's the issue in New Mexico. And she actually said that New Mexico is the #1 state for payouts in medical malpractice in the U.S. So it's not drawing doctors here. It's hard to get them to want to live here, to retain them. So they want to go about putting that back in place. But she also said the governor and the Democrats have to be on the same side as this. Like if the Republicans need support to get this through the roundhouse. And if the Democrats and if Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, if they don't want to put that cap in place, then it's not going to happen.
So New Mexico House Republicans now have their legislative priorities set. Now it all comes down to bipartisan collaboration and how much they can get passed. Albuquerque Journal Assistant Business Editor Megan Gleason with the latest. Thank you so much, Megan.
Thanks, Gino.
If you like hearing all of the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal here on the Leading News, consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal. You can check our show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription and keep up with all the latest news from New Mexico's leading news source. Michelle Torma has filed a lawsuit against Presbyterian Health System and Southwest Women's Oncology after a 13-inch surgical retractor was mistakenly left in her abdomen following a 2019 surgery to remove a 75-pound tumor. She's now seeking over $40 million in damages. With the latest on this case, I'm now joined by Journal reporter Oliver Udebrook, who's been following it. Oliver, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks very much for having me.
And Oliver, this is a really unique case. A surgical tool was left in this woman's abdomen following a surgery she had in 2019. How does that exactly happen?
Well, they were removing a 75-pound tumor from her abdomen. They had a mock-up of it in the court, which is just huge. The surgery was back in January of 2019, and during this, what the defendants say is a very complex surgery, they left a 14-inch steel surgical instrument inside of her abdomen, and it was there for about 2 months before they finally did a CT scan and realized that it was there. They had to do a second surgery to remove it.
And Oliver, attorneys for Torma are seeking over $45 million, and that includes $9 to $11 million in compensatory damages and $36.3 million in punitive damages as well. So they're looking for quite a bit here.
Presbyterian would be on the hook for the vast majority of that, compensatory and punitive damages, if the jury sides with the plaintiff's attorneys. So Presbyterian would pay about 90% of the compensatory damages, and they would pay about $98 million in punitive damages too if the jury does what the Torma's attorneys ask.
But Oliver, one of the more unique parts of the story is the fact that Presbyterian is not the only defendant who is listed in this lawsuit. They're also seeking a smaller portion from Southwest Women's Oncology and Dr. Karen Finkelstein. Why are they naming that medical office and Finkelstein in particular?
Aside from Presbyterian Healthcare Services, it was Southwest Women's Oncology is also named as a defendant in the lawsuit because Dr. Karen Finkelstein, who is the gynecologic oncologist for Southwest, was the woman who performed the surgery.
And defense attorneys for Finkelstein are contending that she relied on Presbyterian staff for accurate equipment counts and also acted immediately once the issue was identified. So they're really emphasizing that her role in this whole thing was performing life-saving surgery on Torma, and they're asserting that she shouldn't be held liable for any damages.
Yeah, there's quite a few surgical instruments that are involved with a complex surgery like this. And basically, there are a couple of Presbyterian staff members who are responsible for what's called a surgical count, which basically is an accounting of all the equipment that goes into a patient and should come out of the patient. And apparently that was improperly done in this case.
And on the other side of this, Oliver, you have Presbyterian that is admitting fault for the error, citing a failure in that surgical count process. But they're arguing that this is a case of human error, not negligence, warranting punitive damages, and they're suggesting $500,000 in compensatory damages, saying that's more appropriate in this case. So how are they waging that argument in court?
Well, basically they say that it is a human mistake, and Prez should be required to pay about $500,000 in compensatory damages, but that no punitive damages are warranted in this case because Presbyterian doesn't need to be punished. That's their argument. Basically, they argue that this was human error and not wanton conduct as it's defined by law.
So this is a very interesting case, to say the least, Oliver. I know jurors are currently deliberating, so we'll await the outcome of this, but, one we certainly won't forget anytime soon. Thank you so much for sharing the latest on it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
In other headlines from the newsroom, New Mexico experienced its second warmest year on record in 2024, with average temperatures 3.4 degrees above normal and below average precipitation levels. While January brings cooler weather and increased rainfall, meteorologists predict a return to above average temperatures and dry conditions in February and the spring. The Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office is currently searching for 65-year-old Richard Hoke, a former New Mexico State police officer and Navy veteran who was last seen on January 7th near Atrisco and Draxon. Concerned for his safety, authorities urge anyone with information to contact missing persons detectives at 505-695-9747. That's 505-695-9747. Looking for something to do today? Theatrical Tuesdays is showing The Goonies from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. at the Special Collections Public Library. There's an intro to glass painting and emeling taking place at the Groove Art Space from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Open Art Night is taking place at the Lost Cultures Tea Bar from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And Music Bingo is happening at the Flock of Moons Brewing Company at 7 p.m. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today you can expect sunny skies with a high near 45, and tonight mostly clear with a low around 16. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. For the leading news, I'm Gino Gutierrez.